just like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the NEAR Hall of Fame induction ceremony. As you see, we have a house full tonight, a sold-out show, as a matter of fact, and we have a lot of things to do. So, first of all, I'm just going to take care of a little bit of business. My name is Kim Hart, and I am so pleased to be with you here this afternoon and to meet up with a lot of people I am lucky enough to say are my friends, and look forward to seeing each and every year here at this banquet. As many of you know, the New England Antique Racers Club is a nonprofit organization that supports the history of New England auto racing. NEAR just celebrated, we're happy to say, its 22nd anniversary, and that was just last week, and it's one of the oldest clubs in the United States. For the last 5 years, NEAR has inducted 49 individuals into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame, and this is administered by the New England Antique Racers. Of course, the NEAR cars, the New England Antique Racers, have been in existence since 1981 and has a growing membership of approximately 300 to 400 members and 80 antique race cars. Now, they live throughout the New England area, and on a no-charge basis, they go out to the tracks and put them on display. One of the racetracks that I'm involved with, Stafford Motor Speedway, we welcome them there at that speedway. And I can't tell you what the reaction from the crowd is to see some of these old cars, so people can relive and enjoy those memories, but also to appreciate how far we've come when they look into the cockpit of these cars where some of the pioneers of racing really got things started. Also, it's such a pleasant opportunity for the younger people to see some of that history as well. So we really appreciate the NEAR organization for doing that. Now, the NEAR Hall of Fame honors the people who drove those cars, of course, and others, the car owners and the people in the business of racing. This past year, there were a couple things that really highlighted the attention of history in my life. I do a racing show on WGY Pix 106. And Fonda Speedway celebrated its 50th anniversary. Many of you are very familiar with Fonda Speedway. And Lou Boyd and Andy Fusco put out a book this past year about the history of Fonda Speedway. What a pleasure it was. It was almost like a yearbook. People went around signing the books and just learning the stories firsthand from people that were there. The other book that drew attention, of course, is the Bugsy book, written by Bugsy Stevens and Bones Bercier. What a phenomenal job they did. And of course, not just about Bugsy Stevens, but about a lot of the people in this room. So I send personal thanks for the writers of those books, and to know that the public really, really is enjoying them. Of course, I know that they have them out there. People would like to pick up a copy as well. We invite you to enjoy the afternoon as we honor some of the great pioneers who built the foundation of our great sport as we know it today. Now, some of the things that our inductees will be receiving, each living inductee will receive a plaque to take home. They will also be placing a plaque on this wall over here. They will be getting a commemorative t-shirt from the NEAR organization, and also the NEAR jacket as well. So each one of our inductees will be receiving that. The family of each posthumously inducted inductee will receive a plaque and a commemorative t-shirt. All of the inductees will receive a video of today's ceremony. That's something you'll want to keep. And of course, if other people would like that video, I'm sure they can get a copy of that as well. On the outside table, there are t-shirts and other things that NEAR distributes, all the money going back into this great organization. So we also invite you to head on out there and check out all that merchandise. I would now like to introduce to you NEAR's president. The first Hall of Fame was implemented as part of his first year as president, and as part of the change of the direction he has brought to this club. Al Feeney was just elected to serve his 4th term as president. He has the passion of a racer and the appreciation of a fan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Al Feeney.
We're just going to take a few minutes to thank the people responsible for today's event. This is the first year we sold advertisements in our program book, and I'd like to thank all the people that bought the ads. Thank you, and again, we'll be doing this again next year, so if somebody wants to get involved with that project next year, check with one of the board of directors. Again, NEAR, all the members of NEAR are all unpaid volunteers, and I want to thank all the members for all the work they did to make today's event such a success. First of all, Doug Farrell. This young man wrote all the biographies for the program book, as well as doing many of our press releases. He is also editor of our newsletter. Danny and Marie Pardee handled all the ticket sales and table assignments. A tough job that I know I couldn't handle, and since no food fights have broken out, I assume they did a good job. The Seller family, which includes Bob and Rachel, their daughter Rhonda Blanchette, her husband Jerry, and their daughter Megan are responsible for all the near merchandise, shirts, jackets, and etc. Their table is set up out in the lobby, and again, it'd be enjoyable if you would take some of this memorabilia home, because it will always remember you of today's event. Pete Newsham jumped in and sold all the advertisements. Tom Hornby is our webmaster. You can visit our site at www.near1.com, and he's our public relations specialist and probably responsible for this large turnout. Pete Zanardi is our mentor. He serves on our program committee, does a lot of our writing, knows everyone and all the stories. Ari Sylvia is on the program committee. He is our historian and chairman of our selection committee, and he also tabulates all the votes. I want to thank all the members of the board of directors and the board of advisors. They work hard at this and at all our club functions. And most of all, I want to thank our spouses for being supported and providing help when needed. And last but not least, a person that did a real special job this year. I first met Lou Boyd 5 years ago yesterday, February 1st, 1998, at our first induction ceremony when he inducted Bill Welch. I had heard and read a lot about him, but frankly, he was not what I expected. He was very professional and very well-spoken, and defying the image in my mind of a racer who used to tow 250 miles one way to slide around in the dirt at Fonda Speedway under the name of Finch Fenton. Our relationship has grown into one of friends who share the same interests. 2 weeks ago, I had a problem. The scripts for the plaques weren't ready. It was nobody's fault. Just some things happened that were beyond anyone's control. Pete Zanardi suggested I contact Lou. I emailed him with my problem, and he jumped right in without hesitation. Within 3 days, I had my scripts. If you don't think this is a big deal, try to capture the essence and life of a person and his career in just 150 words with a 3-day deadline. If you can do that, do it for 8 more. There are a total of 8 different inductees. In my opinion, the display of the plaques is one of the most important things we do. In 10, 20, 50, maybe even 100 years from now, the future fans will see the plaques on display and get a good sense of the history of auto racing in New England. When I designed the plaques, I chose 2 pictures, one a head shot to show the person as he looked, another picture to show the type of car that he was involved with, and third, the 150-word description of his racing activities that were the reason that he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Lou Boyd did this. You'll be able to see the plaques afterwards, and it's just great. And it's a special thank you to Lou Boyd. And how about a large round of applause for everybody who put on this event? Thank you.
Thank you. The biggest single financial supporter of these events and of the Hall of Fame is New England Racing Fuels, owned by John Holland and Mike Joy. Each year they have a benefit t-shirt and sweatshirt sale, the proceeds of which go to benefit this organization. And with this year's check, John Holland.
Thank you. Again, we came out with the winners of the modified tour that use our Sunoco brand product, and also this year on the shirt we have Peter Daniels, who was the regional champion and also used the Sunoco race fuel. And I'd like to have Al Feeney come up so I can present him a check for this year from New England Racing Fuel based on the sales of these shirts. Thank you.
Thank you, John. This is not a first-time event for the New England Racing Fuels. John Holland / Mike Joy, owners. This is the 5th check we have got from them, and previous to this check, we had already received in excess of $5,000. That shows to me a real commitment to this, and reality, when you all leave, visit our Mobile Museum outside, because their donations every year to the sale of the t-shirts are what's responsible for the purchase of that vehicle. So on behalf of all the members of New England Antique Racers, I want to thank John and Mike Joy from New England Racing Fuels. Thank you.
Well, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you someone I suspect everyone in this room knows well. You have probably heard his voice at a local speedway. Mike Joy began his announcing career at Riverside Park in 1970. Hard to believe it's been 33 years. He's only 40 years old, so I don't know how he managed to accomplish that, but it's really spectacular. And from Riverside Park to Thompson Speedway, Stafford Speedway, points in between, eventually it brought Mike to Motor Racing Network in Daytona Beach, Florida, where for many years he was the anchor, business manager ultimately as well. CBS saw talent and hired him. TNN saw talent, and for many years Mike was the TNN anchor for Winston Cup and the Busch Series broadcasts as well. And then CBS saw fit to put Mike in the anchor chair, and Mike did the final few races that CBS did as a broadcast network covering NASCAR, and when Fox put its deal together, Mike got the call again. He is one of the busiest television personalities covering motorsports, working all year long. Fox at the front end of the season, his trackside shows that preview races at the tail end of the season, the NBC half of things, as well as qualifying events and more. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the best products New England has ever brought to big league auto racing, our MC for today, Mike Joy.
I'm told by Al that we have over 500 people here, that the event is a sellout, and we're in danger of outgrowing yet another location for the Hall of Fame dinner, and all of that is good news. I know that many of you are not members of New England Antique Racers, and I would encourage you to join. You don't have to be an antique to be part of the organization. They're very clear on that. There's no minimum age to join the group. But if you have an interest in the history of this sport and its development over the last 100 or so years here in New England, we do encourage you to join, and they'll have a display out in the lobby, and you'll find their write-ups in the racing newspapers to find out how to get hold of this group. One thing we found from our Fox research is that 1/3 of the television audience for Winston Cup racing is new to the sport within the last 3 years. We found that both surprising, and we found it a little sad that all of these people who are just now finally finding out what we have known for years, that this is the greatest sport in America, don't have the luxury of knowing many of the people that we've honored in this Hall of Fame and will honor today and in the succeeding years. Auto racing as a whole has done kind of a poor job of holding on to its history. And one large reason is economic. If you're the sanctioning body or promoter and you're trying to get to the next race and get it run, you don't have a lot of interest in the results of the ones that preceded. I know that many of you have personal collections of memorabilia, clippings, race results, and the like. Please don't let those things get away. Tom Hornsby has a website, vintagemodifieds.com and snracing.com. You'll find a lot of history there on the internet. And this history deserves to be preserved for future generations, and there are people within the NEAR organization that have the interest and the devotion and the time to help catalog and put this history together. So before you let your mom, your mom threw away your baseball cards. Before you let your daughter throw away all that box of old racing clippings, then your folks have a home for it. We're going to follow the rundown on your program for our induction, and I'll bring you our first presenter, who himself was a great racing star in the early 50s when he and 3 or 4 of his buddies just built a race car for something to do. And that turned into an avocation that resulted in the 1956 Plainville Stadium Championship. Would you please welcome Phil Mitchell, who will make our first presentation.
Before we get started, inducting Moon, I want to thank Al Feeney and Near, all his crew. Dick DeRozier gave me the call. At first I said, no, there's got to be somebody else. But the more I thought about it, Moon was kind of my idol, and when he retired, I took over his ride. Before we get started, I have a letter from Moon and my car owner, Joe Fontana, that I'd like to read. It's dated January 16th. Mr. Al Feeney, President of NEAR. Dear Mr. Feeney, my friend, my first preference is to be with you, with all my associates and friends tonight at this annual Hall of Fame induction. As circumstances demand, I am unable to attend this event honoring Moon Burgess and all the other Hall of Fame inductees. This prestigious event highlights the accomplishments of the NEAR organization, which ranks above the very best efforts nationally, bringing together participants of an era that has been long forgotten. Moon's actions on the racetrack deserves the recognition being demonstrated here tonight. As a car owner of the Flying Jimmy #1 Eagle, which Moon drove to numerous victories, I can say he was the very best of his time. He would have made an excellent candidate for Teddy Roosevelt. There was none better than Moon gassing the GMC 6 out of the turns at Bridgeport, Candlelight Stadium, West Haven, Plainville, and the Park. His best defense was his brother Frankie's fist cuffing on the pit road. I now reside in California. I now reside in California, but become a NEAR Life member due to Moon's influence, which undoubtedly spread because of his wife Rita recruiting him. I wish to thank Phil Mitchell, Walt Smith for contacting me regarding this affair. It is my privilege and acknowledgement to enclose a check for NEAR for $1,000 to be used as the organization wishes. Meanwhile, I will continue building midget motors and record land speed with my GMC 6. Have a good evening. Yours truly, Joseph A. Fontana. Okay, now we'll get down to the induction of Moon, my old buddy. Moon Burgess. Richard Moon Burgess, the first inductee to speed, come on the occasion of his birth, as he was born in an ambulance, speeding along Meriden County and West Main Street, rushing to the hospital. He has always used this as his excuse for liking to go fast. By the mid-1940s, just after the war, a friend showed Moon a copy of the Illustrated Speedway News. He found the paper contents interesting, and soon after him and his friends went to their first midget race. He describes himself as becoming instantly hooked. From then on, he chased the midgets to tracks like West Haven, Bridgeport, West Springfield, and Deer Park, traveling with some friends that they scraped together enough money. Soon Moon was introduced to the world of stock car racing when his employer's regular driver backed out on him. 19-year-old Moon was easily persuaded to take over the driving duties. This would prove to be eventful, as it would not only be his first time behind the wheel of a stock car, but it's the very first race that he ever saw. That was in 1947 at Thompson, when he drove a black 37 Ford Coupe outfitted with a 1936 Ford engine. He fondly remembers his ride as having carpet for the firewall, tow rope for a safety belt, and a triple X embossed on with masking tape on the door and on the rear trunk lid. Either because or in spite of all this, after a couple of laps, Moon was hooked. He simply claims you just had to be there. He attributes his rapid success in the infancy of his career to the education he received by watching and competed against the open cockpit drivers, especially Ted Tappett, Al Kelly. On the track education, they supplied Moon family members the tricks they played on him in the pits. Frequently, Moon would climb into the cockpit, only to find that they had spread peanuts on his seat. And one night at Bridgeport, he climbed in to find a rubber snake in his seat. In the end, he found revenge at holding his own against winning the title of High Point Man at Avon Cherry Park. Over the span of his relatively short, yet much celebrated career, Moon's aggressive driving style enabled him to be a threat both on dirt and on asphalt. During the late 1940s, and early 50s, he raced and won most everywhere in the Northeast. He captured 63 features. Incidentally, in the program, it says that he captured 6 features. He captured 63 features, winning along with the 1949 championship. However, we remember most vividly Moon, who best known by piloting the Joe Fontana 6-cylinder GMC Flying Eagle #1, belching its flame of fire out the exhaust. Moon regularly bested the likes of Ed Flemke, Buddy Krebs, Gene Bergen, Sparky Belmont, Redfoot, Ted Tappett, Giacomo Giacomo. I think all but one of those are in the hall that he joins. One of the highlights of Moon's career come at Plainville Stadium, where one night he became up against the likes of Indy 500 competitor Big Boy Al Killer. The 25 lap wound down, the big track ace looked to be a sure winner. He had undoubtedly Moon clipped away at Keller's half-lap lead. On the final lap, Keller come into lap traffic. Moon grabbed the lead on the outside of the third turn in spectacular style. Moon held on for the win. After the show, when Keller put his arm around Moon and said, "Nice job, son," it stood out as being the proudest moment of his career. In more recent times, his two grown boys, Richie and Jamie, have had the opportunity to drive his restored coupe, which is out in the front here. It's a nice job, Moon. We come here tonight to fondly remember the times when driving ability, not fancy equipment, earned a driver's respect and success in this timeless area. Moon made an enduring mark on stock car racing here in the Northeast. Please join me in welcoming the Meriden Flash, the Silver City skipper, Moon Burgess, to the podium.
Before I get started, I'd like to congratulate all the inductees. You boys are true legends of our sport, and I'm deeply honored to be in your company. I've been told that on this special day it's customary to tell a story or two, so I'd like to share one of my family's favorites. One night at Riverside Park, I was leading the feature in the Jimmy with only 2 laps left. As I was working my way around a lap car, he drove into my left rear and took me completely out. I had given him plenty of room, and at the time I felt like he did it intentionally. Now, I always prided myself as trying to be a clean driver who never got mad behind the wheel. But that night I was steamed. I mean, I was really upset. I'd never been so mad. So, as I was spinning, I ramped it in second gear and put the pedal to the floor. Did a 360 and kept on going. But unfortunately lost the lead in the process and ended up in the back in the pack somewhere. On the cool down lap, I kept digging and went looking for the guy that spun me. I finally caught up with him coming out of 4 and got right on his rear bumper. Now, keep in mind that the Flying Eagle's inline 6 was all torque. Even with the brakes locked up, maybe he only had one wheel brake, I don't know. I was able to push him down the front straightaway and build up a good head of steam. By the time we reached number 1, we were flying. So I slammed the brakes on and parked them in the first turn wall. And I thought, I said, you know, this car belongs to Big Pete Paranzino, and he's part of the Milford Mafia. Now what do I do? Do I make a run for it? No. I headed for the pits. So, like a swarm of angry bees, this crowd surrounded the car. My brother Frank, who was our self-appointed crew chief and bodyguards, stuck his head in the window and said, "You stay in that car." "Yes, sir, Frank." I didn't have any plans on going anywhere. Suddenly we saw someone frantically pushing his way through the mob, heading straight for us. As soon as the man broke from the mob, my brother ran up and punched him right in the face. Bad, Frank. Laid him right out. So from the ground, the guy looks up and says, Frank, what did you hit me for? I'm on your side." Yeah, that's gospel. That night, I never thought my wildest dreams I would be inducted into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. I thought they were going to kill me and throw my body in the Connecticut River. And I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for the support of a lot of wonderful people. First, I'd like to thank New England Auto Racers selection and nominating committees, New England Antique Racers, officers and directors, and advisors, and everyone who made this great honor possible. You folks keep the history of auto racing alive and make sure that the story and characters who built it live on. I thank my car owners for giving me the opportunity to drive great equipment and do what I love. I thank Pete Hazelwood, who gave me my number 2 ride. I thank Ron Olson, pit crew extraordinaire, and Joe Fontana, who built the GMC-powered Flying Eagle that carried me to many victories. Joe was always an innovator. He used to measure the track with a slide ruler, and he used jack and bolts and stagger at a time when things like that weren't heard of, unless we were at the beer garden up at the park. I'd like to thank all the wonderful friends I've made throughout the years for always standing by me and lending a helping hand. I'd like to thank Randy and Cindy Hall for towing my car from Coventry down to Durham, back up here, back to Coventry, back to Durham again. Thanks, Randy. And finally, I'd like to thank I'd like to thank my family for their endless support and love. This honor wouldn't have been possible without you. I'd like to thank family friend Tolstoy for flying all the way from Chicago to be here. And finally, I'd like to thank the most lovely lady in the world, my wife, Frida. Yes, can you help Mom up? You have always been there for me. You're my right arm and best friend. And I want everyone to know that on this Valentine's Day, another 12 days or so from now, Rita and I will have been married 50 wonderful years. We heard the story about Al Keller, but I'll say it again. In 1952, I went to Indy and had a chance to watch my boyhood hero, big boy Al Keller, run the 500. He was really my hero. And soon after, he came up north to try out for Ted Tappett's number 23 ride. Ted had gone to run Le Mans, and the 23 car was open. We started side by side on the last row, and I followed him up through traffic. Soon we were running 1 and 2 bumper to bumper. On the last lap, going into 4, he slid up behind some lap cars and had to lift. I dove to the inside, just beating him to the wire for the win. After the race, Al Keller, my hero, came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Good race, son." To win the praise of a driver I held in such high regard was the highlight of my career. But today, to earn the respect of my peers and the racing community means more to me. Thank you and God bless.
We next recognize not just an individual, but really a whole racing family that has helped this sport grow and prosper for 3 and soon to be 4 generations, and that is a rare treat. The man who will do the honors for our next induction needs little introduction. He was one of the creators of the Spring Sizzler, one of New England's great races, is a noted author, and as earlier mentioned, racer. Would you please welcome Lou Boyd.
Well, here we are again at this amazing Hall of Fame banquet. And as always, you know, we really need to start out by a heartfelt thanks to Al Feeney and everybody who's made this happen. The thing that I think is so incredible about it is that it's happened so fast. And this really has become almost an infrastructural part of racing in New England. So thank you guys and gals who put so much effort behind this. But you know, in a slightly more sobering subject, it seems that there aren't very many conversations these days that don't somehow end up with a reference to the economy. Things are kind of tough in this part of the economy, this part of the country. Jobs are being lost, there are bankruptcies, there are medical insurance problems, indeed, there's corporate greed. It's a tough time. However, historians would say that the good news in these kind of times is that if things are as they usually are, in several years we'll feel the effects of an entrepreneurial explosion. These are the times when lots of small businesses are formed. And they're formed by the real doers in our society. And surely our next inductee was one of them. In the 1930s, John Honig was running a small dairy farm and sawmill business in Thompson, Connecticut. It was soon after the Depression, and that was a really hard time. Then, on the first day of autumn in 1938, disaster really struck with that infamous hurricane of '38. Everything was a mess. Everything was broken. Everything save John Honig. Taking the bold course of really snatching opportunity out of calamity, Honig wanted to do something new, something that he'd heard about and researched a little bit. He set out to build a racetrack, a big one, on that sleepy Connecticut site. And in retrospect, doesn't his vision seem so similar to what Big Bill France must have gone through 20 years later when he started his expansive tri-oval down in Daytona? Honig's huge, high-banked 5/8 mile track, arguably the country's very first asphalt paved speedway, soon became known as the Indianapolis of the East. His testosterone was rewarded immediately with a capacity crowd on opening day in 1940. It soon became a backbone of racing in the Northeast. Ted Horn, Rex Mays, Bill Holland danced on the surface, as did NASCAR stars, the Pettys, Allisons, and Bakers. And over time, Thompson would become an incubator of its own, growing Winston Cup talent like Steve Park, Pete Hamilton, and Ron Bouchard. If anyone ever needed to question the legacy of John Honig's clear vision and hard work, consider the World Series at Thompson last fall. Over 60 years since that first opening day, 519 cars jammed the pits with an overflow of 11,000 fans watching. It is in fact inconceivable that any serious race follower in New England could have not spent some Sundays at the tee. And that, ladies and gentlemen, calls loudly for accreditation from NEAR. Talk about a lasting impression on our sport. So it is with great pleasure that I invite Don Honig, Thompson promoter since the 60s, to the podium to accept induction on behalf of his dad, John Honig. Don?
This is such an overwhelming crowd. I'm just astonished. I just unbelievable to me. I remember back many years ago, Lou Boyd, Dick Berggren, Bill Welch, and a group of gentlemen came to me and said, we have a proposal for it. I said, what is this? He said, well, we'd like to do a race at your speedway. Well, I said, tell me a little something about it. So Dick is kind of the spokesman of Lou, and well, we can't tell you much about it. This is really something. This is going to be a real race event. Well, I said, tell me what it is. They wouldn't tell me. I said, sorry, gentlemen, no tell, no race. About 3 weeks later, reading the paper, Spring Sizzler, Stappen Motor Speedway. So I remember those days, Dick and Lou. So now I remember, so now I get a call from, so I refused that. So now I get a call from Lou. Said, I have a little proposal for it. I said, what is this? He would like to do something in Thompson. I said, what is that? And I'm thinking in my mind, I said, this time around, I'm not refusing Lou. So he said it was the Buck Stevens book, and he wanted to bring Bugsy to the World Series and do a presentation and for his book and the whole bit. So that was really a great day, and we really appreciate having Bugsy and Lou, and the whole weekend was really great. Anytime you have Bugsy around, you know it's going to be a great weekend. But anyway, getting back to today, I brought along a couple other generations. I'm just going to bring them up here. I'll just introduce them for a moment. This is my son, Donald, and my grandson, Donald. So we got 3 generations here. This is my son, Donald, better known as DR to everyone. He's involved in every phase of our business. He doesn't get into the promotional end of it all that much, but he makes the whole facility work. Behind the scenes, from electrician to you name it. He does everything. And this is what's kept our facility going. I got my grandson, Donald. He's known as DJ, Donald John, same as mine, the second. I have another grandson also. He's involved. He does all the novelties and so forth. Unfortunately, he's in Yukon along with Don. They had a project today, so he could not be here. But it's great to have a family. I have 3 daughters. The daughters have all been involved at one time or another, involved in racing. They all support me, support the facility. We have a great family. And I get back to here today. I just cannot believe, looking back those many years, I sat in the grandstand for the very first race at Thompson, the old wooden grandstand, in the top row seat, and I was 11 and a half, 11 years old, was viewed the very first race. So that always sticks in my mind. It was a big car, 3A sanctioned event. So I've been there so many years since that, and so many things have happened, and seen the good times, the bad times, and so forth. But when I look out here, and I say all those years, and my dad is being honored this day. It's so hard to believe because, when you go back to the late 30s, and I still have memories of him, and he's passed away like 14 years ago. And I tell you, I have a difficult time with this because we gave a cemetery plot, which is on our golf range. It overlooks the speedway and the restaurant. And I live, and my son Donald, they both live, we all live on the same road. And each and every morning and day, I have to drive by that cemetery and give a little wave. And believe me, it's not easy. It's very difficult. So I only wish that he could have been here today to witness something of this nature. All these friends, all the old timers here, so many years have passed that I see familiar faces, I've forgotten names, but it's been great. Now we're sitting at the table and I have my concession man, Steve Rubin. His family has been with us for like 31 years at the Speedway. And, everybody complains, oh Steve, your prices are too high. But anyway, the food is great. We're sitting here thinking, we're talking a little bit, and, I feel we haven't done much for NERA over the years. You come to our Speedway, I'm busy running around, I don't pay attention. We're pressing to do a race program. We don't give you fair time. So we were talking, and I want to make a little proposal to NERA, and I want to welcome your organization on some given day to Thompson, and we'll do, a real open house party, no race event or anything. Bring all your friends, bring all your race cars, have a full day of having a real good time. I think my dad would really like to have done that for you. So all I have to say is thank you from the bottom of my heart, my whole family, and we're really gracious to accept this award. Thank you.
Our speakers thus far have talked about some of the great folks that have come out of New England and gone on to big things in auto racing. And our next presenter is a bit of a surprise because he has done just that. And I'm very surprised and very impressed that 2 days before leaving to take his team to Daytona to run in the 500, he's taken the time to be with us today to induct one of his heroes, our next inductee. Would you please welcome from the state of New Hampshire, a proud son of New England, Winston Cup crew chief Frank Stoddard.
I was going to tell you guys earlier that I was all thinking over there that it's going to be a whole lot easier to make calls to try to win the Daytona 500 in a couple of weeks than it's going to be to stand up here and do this tonight. It's a lot easier to do it in front of the camera than it is in front of 200 or 500 people, I guess. And I want to thank Dick Bergen for calling and asking me to do this. I think I want to thank you. Maybe I don't want to thank you. But I'm going to do a little bit different. I really kind of want to tell about Stub Fadden and what he's meant to my career and what he's meant to a lot of people's career throughout racing. You guys can read most of the things that he's done in racing in the brochure. My first memory of Stub was in about 1978. I was fortunate enough to be friends with his grandson. He and I were best friends growing up, still are probably best friends today. And unless I do a real lousy job of this speech, and he might take me off the list. But anyway, in 1978, I can remember I went to the racetrack with Stub. He had an old blue bus, and it was all of his friends and family that he took to the racetrack to help him. His son Alvin was his crew chief for forever. And then he later went on to be his sponsor hunter and just jack of all trades. So I went over there to Thunder Road that day, rode in the bus with him, and he dropped me off out there at the front gate and went up and sat in the turn one grandstands by myself. Michael actually didn't go to that race. He was at a baseball game, Babe Ruth game, and I was 10 years old. And I can still remember him winning that race that night against Dave Dion. There was a year that they won. There was 3 races held that year at that racetrack, and he won all 3 of them. Went on to win the championship. But Dave Dion and him had a long-standing rivalry throughout his career, and just to be there and watch that, and then through the years seeing all the different things that he did against Dave and the competition that he had was neat. The proudest thing for me is being a part of inducting a man who not only had a great career on the racetrack, but has helped to shape so many other people's careers. He was somebody that when he went to the racetrack, I'm a competitive type individual that if somebody comes over and wants a little bit of, what right front spring you got in the car, I'm probably not going to tell them the truth. But Stubby would always shoot him straight. As I got older, I'm not sure that I really appreciated that much because we probably lost races that we might have won against somebody. But nonetheless, my deal was if you could get rid of some competition, the less competition you had at the racetrack, the better off you were going to be. But Jamie Obie was a young guy, probably in about 80 or 81. He came to the racetrack and started racing a little bit, and he'd run out of money, blew up somewhere, and Jamie's told me this story many times. Stub called him up and told him to come over and get a motor from him. And Stub, was a mechanic. He had his own auto repair center, so he built engines on his own, and he probably put one together for Jamie on the side. But Jamie didn't want any part of it, and Stub didn't want no part of him telling him that he wasn't going to come and get the motor because Jamie didn't have enough money to pay for it, but Stub didn't care. He wanted the young kid to come back to the racetrack and run again. And, so that's another little story of a guy that he went on to be a 3-time Busch Grand National champion that, Stub didn't ever have to help the guy. I mean, I would have just swept him aside and said, that's one less guy I got to race against. But throughout Stub's deal, really he had a lot of trials and tribulations, I'd say, because between Michael and myself, when Michael was just a little kid, why Stubb never ran him off or something after he broke the bubble bouncer trying to get the bubble out of the middle of it. I'm not really sure. But the fact that he did that probably made it where it was easier for him to put up with me all the years. But that was just the way Stubb was. You know, there was different drivers that came on in the series. There was rookies. This guy named Randy McDonald came in from Oshawa, Ontario. And he started, I think it was 85 that he competed against us. Competed for Rookie of the Year on the Coors Tour, the Bush North. And I remember one week he'd been to the shop. Stubb let him use the race shop. You know, he'd been there all week working on his car. And we went to Seekonk that weekend. And Stubb was leading the race, as it turned out. Back in these early years, by the way, I'm going to jump around a lot here, as you can tell. I was just a little crew member on the car and stuff, helping out. And but I was, you know, a digger and a fighter. I'm always wanting to win, and always irritated when somebody did something that cost Stubb a win. So we'd gone and, you know, Stubb had let him use the shop and done all these things for him. We got to the racetrack, and Stubb was leading the race. There was probably 10 laps to go. Second place was quite a ways back. He got to Randy McDonald to lap him, and to me, all hell broke loose. We didn't get by him, and we didn't end up winning the race. The guy in second did, and I can remember Alvin. You know, he's a redhead, and he was mad. I mean, he was fit to be tied. I didn't think we'd ever let Randy back in the shop again, but Stubb, you know, he just shrugged it off, and you know, the kid came back to the shop a couple weeks later, and I'm sure off to the side that Stubb sat down and had a conversation with the kid and probably told him what his thoughts were, but that's where Stubb was unique. He really didn't ever tell, you know, I never really got much of a feeling on, you know, where his mindset was, because he kept it all inside. He really didn't say a whole lot to many people, and probably Charlotte took all the grief from him. But so I wanted to list off a couple of the guys, you know, that he had helped along the way. Tommy Rosati, who was the youngest Oxford 250 winner, was somebody that when he came to the racetrack, Stubb always took the time to talk to. Randy LaJoy, two-time Bush Cell champion, that when he came to the Bush North Series back in the early 80s, he brought Bob Johnson along with him, who wasn't, you know, exactly the friendliest guy, which I have great admiration for Bob. But Stubb talked to Randy a lot, you know. Dana Patton, Chuck Bound, two-time Bush Cell champion, and another local racer that I wanted to talk about that lived in town was Brad Kennedy. And he, why Stubb is still friends with him is only because Stubb has persevered, you know, and Brad, because Alvin, Stubb's son, got involved in trying to help manage Brad's, you know, racing endeavors a little bit. Brad didn't have a whole lot of money, and Stubb tried to help him all the time, and Alvin had this big deal one year that they were gonna make enough money to race all year long for Brad. And he wanted Brad to go to Dover, Delaware. Brad only had one car, only had one motor, you know, didn't think that was a good idea. Like I said, Stubb doesn't say a whole lot, so I don't think he thought it was a very good idea, but he trusted his son's, you know, sense, or in this case, maybe lack of sense, but most of the time Alvin made very good decisions. And so anyway, they went to Brad. He talked Brad. Brad didn't think it was a good idea, but he talked him into going. So off they went to Dover, Delaware. Well, they got down there, and Brad goes out in practice and blows up. So then he's got to go get another motor. He puts another motor in. They go and run the race. I don't think he, you know, made many laps in the race, but it wasn't a very profitable day. Nevertheless, so they load up to go home. Brad's thinking, well, you know, he's in the hole, whatever he's in the hole, a lot of money probably. It wasn't profitable. And heading up the highway, and now the hauler breaks down. So now Brad's sitting beside the road, and he's got, you know, him and his buddy helping sitting there. And Alvin, he drives by, never sees Brad. Stubb goes by, he never sees Brad. Now Brad's got to run a rider truck to get home. So there's been things that Michael and myself and Alvin have done to cause Stubb not to have as many friends in racing, but somewhere he's persevered over all that. Funny story about Stubb is that you know, he was the type of guy on the racetrack that, you know, he raced you real clean. I mean, I never saw him take anybody out, much as I wanted him to take somebody out. And the only time I wasn't there to witness it, but through all the things that had gone on, I guess, through the people that had come to the shop and he'd let them borrow something and, you know, it never went his way, it didn't seem like. He finally was in Laval, Canada one night, and I believe it was where it was, somebody will probably correct me, and this guy named Alan Whipple, Stubb was leading the race, and Whipple took him out. And I don't know where Stubb ended up finishing. I wasn't fortunate enough to be there, but came back and heard enough stories from Alvin, and, I mean, Alvin was just fit to be tied. And so they went to Claremont the next week, which was Whipple's home racetrack. And I think somewhere along the way, Stubb had made up his mind that he was, finally going to get somebody, pay somebody back for something over the years. It just all this is built up. And so Stubb was out there running, and he saw that number 1 yellow car come up beside him, and it was Alan Whipple. So he spun him out. Stubb never did a good job of spinning anybody out. He spun himself out, I think, too. And so, I mean, Stubb, he's probably elated. I'm just guessing on this part. He's probably, I finally got somebody, And he gets into the garage area afterwards, and here comes Punky Karen after him. And of course, Alvin, I don't know whether Alvin realized what had gone on either, but somewhere during the middle of this race, Alan Whipple had gotten sick. He pulled into the pits, and Punky Karen got in the car. And so that kind of ended Stubb from ever, paying anybody back for anything, I think. Like I mentioned earlier, I just want to say that the biggest thing that Stubb was he was a family man. I mean, everybody that raced with him was his friends or his family. His wife was his scorer forever. I remember when she was sick in the hospital. It was for a couple of years or something. I remember as just a little kid, we'd drive down there 2 or 3 nights a week, and it was real difficult, I could tell on him back then, to go to the racetrack without Charlotte there, because she'd always been there through everything he'd ever done. He had his brothers, his nephews, volunteers. They all came, weekly. His daughter Charlene, her son is Michael, and she's brought the grandkids and her kids and everybody to the racetrack. So it's always been a family affair for him, and I think that that's the thing that transcends for me, is that is the values that he's shown myself, shown Mike Olson, is what's been able to make me be able to go on and have some sort of a career in racing. Young people aren't always fortunate to have somebody that shows those types of values, and the respect that he has for the other competitors on the racetrack. I came back in 1991 to crew chief him, moved back from North Carolina, and I can assure you that the fondest days, I tell people all the time, the best days I've ever had was winning races with him. We were fortunate enough, he was 61 years old, I believe is the number, and getting back to Dave Dion, Dave Dion was leading the race at Lee, New Hampshire in 1994, and Stubb passed him with about 30 laps to go to win the race, a 200-lap race at age 61. That same year, he also passed Robbie Crouch to win the race, a 200-lap race in Jennerstown. And I brought those 2 names up because, they're guys that are respected, obviously, and throughout racing. Robbie Crouch, 6-time champion. But at age 61, to have the perseverance and the stamina and the desire to keep racing and going out and competing like that was a thrill for me to continue to be a part of. And anything I've ever done or will ever continue to do in racing will never be any more special than the wins that I had with him at those races. His resume, like I said, over 1,000 feature starts, 230 wins, 1976 Don McTavish Award, 2-time Milk Bowl winner, New England 200 and 300 winner, track champion at Thunder Road, Catamount, Mont Laurier, 3-time Sportsmanship Award winner of the Triple Crown, Nels Corner, Ontario, the 250 against Junior Hanley and some strong competition. Today, Stubb works at races at White Mountain Motorsports Park with his grandson Todd. And all the local racers, they come to him just as they did in 1961 when he used to go and weld up their cars, and that's how he got into starting racing. Now they come to him over there to ask for little tips on the side, so he's helping Todd, but he's helping Todd's competition, so it still goes the same way. The respect that he has, from all the competitors, Bobby Dragon, Dick McCabe, everybody, he'd not have nearly the respect, today from as many as he has the respect from, had he raced any differently on the racetrack. And I think that's a tribute to him and to a lot of people to look up and, think that when you get older, you want to look back and say you're respected. I mean, you could win 5 or 6 more races, but if you're not respected doing it, then it's not as much fun in the end. So, without further ado, today we induct a man who not only helped to shape the past of racing, but because of his off-track qualities, he continues to be a part of shaping the futures of many talented racers. A man who has given far more to this great sport than what he took from it. I'm honored to be part of this today, I'm honored to be here today, a part of this great day. Stub Fadden.
I don't think I want to play one of these committees. I'll be stealing your book.
That was the one bonus that I knew him coming after me, I couldn't screw my speech up to your head.
Besides, he's probably one of the guys that wanted to keep the thing short so he wouldn't miss his airplane. Nevertheless, I was quite surprised. I had no idea Frank was going to be here. I thought Berger was going to introduce me because he's the guy that said he'd been digging in my past. So I was afraid he was going to. And, I was going to tell Charlotte, don't believe everything he said. So I was real surprised today to walk in and meet Frankie on the way in because I had no idea that he was going to be here. I'm terrifically honored to be here. As a race car driver, you know, you struck in that seat, you hook up the belts, and you take the parade lap, and you're ready for the green. And man, you're all relaxed. Man, when you stand up here in front of 400 or 500 people, it's a different deal. I think that all would tell you that. Anyhow, thanks for all the nice things you said, Frank. Charlotte, I told you good things are going to come out of racing. This is a great meal we had here. It was by far better than the muscatolian half-fried chicken up the St. Johnsbury Grain Center. As racing started, as we started out racing, I say we, my family, that'd be Charlene, my daughter, who's never did like racing, still don't, but got two boys that are into racing, and my son Alvin, and of course my wife Charlotte, and that was our racing family. Now today I got 16 of the immediate family here, besides 4 great grandchildren at home, and one Amy's either son or daughter who's almost here, so I'm going to have 5 great-grandchildren in the clan, so I guess, you know, I've met a lot of great people, a lot of friends. I know a lot of people here, a lot of people I don't know, but racing's been good to us, good to me. I don't know that in my day that I'd ever put any bread on the table, but I don't think it took any off of me either, so we had a pretty good balance, had a great life, and enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you.
There's some folks that are such a constant presence around racing and such a welcome presence that you always know you've really come home when they're there. And that's our next inductee, because as Bones Bercier wrote in Speedway Illustrated, he was a friend to everybody in racing. Never been a stranger. And to induct a really great man in our sport to this Hall of Fame, and welcome a man who started out covering races at the Plainville Stadium. Actually started out in the grandstand at the Plainville Stadium, and then started writing for weekly and then monthly newspapers and magazines, and now, gosh, he's an author. He has books. Bones Bercier.
I'm not sure exactly what Booker Jones would think of all this fuss being made about him, but I think I know what he'd say. I'm fortunate enough, blessed enough, to have been involved in these induction proceedings since the very first one in 1998. And every time I look at the people who reside in this Hall of Fame, my mind is flooded with images. I see Leo Cleary blasting around a tiny bull ring, winning the feature. I see Ronnie Bouchard gliding around a big half-miler, winning the feature. I see Marvin Rifkin rolling an M&H tire across the pit area. I see Freddie Rosner, wrench in hand, making a fast car even faster. I see Steady Eddie Flemke sitting on a tire, sipping a coffee, pondering the race. Already when I look at the near class of 2003, I have a pretty good sense of the images that these names will bring back. I know I'll see Bob Pulvereri winning a ton of races at a wonderful place called Riverside Park. I'll see the amazing foresight that must have guided John Honig when he built the track I've come to love, the Thompson Speedway. I'll see my old buddy Bobby Judkins in Victory Lane from Connecticut to Florida. And I'll see the open smile and the outstretched hand of Booker Jones. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I don't think Booker ever met a stranger. He drove modified cars all over the Northeast forever. Yet when he passed away last July, it wasn't the racing I thought of first. It was that open smile and that outstretched hand. He was everybody's buddy. He was also a pioneer, of course. Booker was years ahead of his time simply by being himself, a man of color in a largely white sport. Today, with sanctioning bodies and sponsors encouraging diversity, you could almost say that it pays to be different. Well, it sure didn't pay when Booker broke in. Stock car racing was a hard game, it was played by hard men, and a lot of those men had hard heads. It'd be nice to believe that Booker raced all those years without ever feeling the sting of prejudice, but that seems impossible. Yet Booker always insisted to me and everybody else that if any such prejudice ever existed, he never felt it. I don't doubt that, because Booker never wanted to feel it. All he ever wanted was to fit in, to be part of the scene. If people chose to look at him differently, that was their problem. He raced at Riverside Park, he raced at Stafford, he raced at Thompson, he raced at the Eastern States Fairgrounds, he raced everywhere. Booker knew everybody, and everybody knew Booker. Booker liked everybody, and everybody liked Booker. And why not? Booker had such a big racing heart that he often lent his cars to drivers who ran into trouble with their own equipment. Pete Hamilton and Bud Stevens, both of whom are near Hall of Famers, each took a turn as a substitute driver in the Jones 27. It was Booker to the rescue. Another Hall of Famer, Freddie Becerra, knew what it was like to be rescued by Booker. Writer Phil Smith, who frequently traveled with Freddie, remembers a trip to Long Island's Islip Speedway for an all-star race. Phil wrote, Becerra ended up in a confrontation with a local driver 3 times his size. As the giant lunged for Becerra, Jones stepped in, and in no uncertain terms he told the big guy, if you want him, you gotta go through me first. Needless to say, the guy heeded Jones's warning and he walked away. Truth be told, there are very few men in this Hall of Fame whose careers did not intersect with Booker's. He raced for promoters like Harvey Tattersall and Jack Ruth. He raced against drivers like Buddy Krebs and Reedy Charland in the 50s, Bill Slater and Gene Bergen in the 60s, Billy Greco and Ray Miller in the 70s. Long after Booker hung up his helmet, his tow truck remained a familiar sight at racetracks around New England, and one thing hadn't changed. Booker still liked everybody, and everybody still liked Booker. There were Friday nights at Stafford when there were more VIPs on the back of that blue wrecker watching the modified feature than there were in the VIP booth. And before each race, no matter what track you were at, you'd see Booker making his way up and down the starting grid, shaking hands with this driver and that driver, wishing them the best. He did this so often that many drivers, including another Hall of Famer, Richie Evans, came to see this as a ritual. Billy Nazowitz, Richie's crew chief for years, tells a great story about putting on his radio gear one night just before the feature at Riverside, and suddenly hearing his driver's voice through the headset. Where's Booker? Evans demanded. See, Richie had won 3 or 4 features in a row at Riverside after getting a good luck handshake from his friend, and he was anxious to keep the streak alive. So Nazowitz looked around and he saw Booker's wrecker parked in the pits. You better get out there, Billy said to Booker, who hustled his truck out to the front stretch, extended his hand through the driver's window, and sent Richie on his way. Richie won another feature that night. Booker Jones was a simple man, so it makes sense that the best tribute I ever heard anybody pay him was a simple one. It came from a guy who knew him for better than 25 years, modified car owner Ralph Sullivan. Ralph and I were on the phone one night recently, and he asked me what I was working on. I told him I was trying to figure out exactly the right things to say when it came time to induct Booker into this Hall of Fame. There was a pause on the line, and then Ralph hit it right on the head. He told me, just say he was everybody's friend. Today, the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame opens its door to see the warm smile and the outstretched hand of Booker Jones, and it says this, come in, friend. Here to accept this honor on behalf of Booker Jones is his brother, Bob Jones.
Thank you very, very much, Al Feeney, New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. It's absolutely a great honor to be here, a very powerful honor to be here, to accept this award for Booker. He was my mentor, brother, and friend. And if it wasn't for him, there's some things I wouldn't have accomplished in my life. But I'm not going to take up a lot of time because there's other family members who would like to say a word. But I do want to recognize Ray Anderson and Rick McNally and Bruce Bentley, his crew,
Booker used to always talk about young son heroes. And it was always the crew members that worked on the car, and also the immediate the family, the wives and the family members and the fiancés and the girlfriends that made the sacrifice, the absolute sacrifice in terms of supporting these racers in terms of their goals and objectives. And so they're the unsung heroes that sometimes we don't recognize. And so I do want to make mention of that. One quick story I'd like to make mention of is the last day or the day before when Booker was in the hospital. He died of cancer. The doctors came in, 3 of them, and they said, poked him around the stomach and kept poking him and said, geez, how do you feel, Booker? And Booker said, great, great, great. And he was in terrible pain, but he would not acknowledge that to the family and others. And the doctor said, poked him again, 2 or 3 doctors, specialists were around. How do you feel? Poking him. And Booker says, good, good, I feel good, good. Doctor says, don't be honest with me. He says, no, you can't, you gotta be suffering. He had lost a lot of weight. And Booker challenged him. He looked him in the eye, I saw him, he says, well, you wouldn't want to go around with me, would you? And that was Booker. And so, but he passed away the following morning, and I know he's looking down from heaven, and he's just, I know he's excited to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So I want to thank the board and all the people that put this together, especially Al Feeney, who lives down the street from us in East Long Meadow. He was consistent right there every day, getting information and coming by the house. And Al, thank you so much. I'd like to introduce his wife, Shirley.
My name is Shirley Jones. I was married to Booker for 29 years, and in the 29 years we had a son we named Leonard T. Jones. And the only thing that I can say that I'm very proud to be here, and I wish it was him here instead of me. Thanks.
God holds Booker's future, and he'd be happy now to know that he's also being inducted in the Hall of Fame. He accepted Lord Jesus Christ in his life before he left here, because it's a tough world we live in. And sometimes we don't know, we live on our own, say, I can do it, and leave God out of it. But he came aware. I said, Booker, you know, you were very blessed to do a job that you love. He's always loved working on a car ever since I can remember. An old junk car in the garage, he almost died of carbon monoxide, and him and his buddies. I mean, he has had his life on the line so many times I can't even tell you. Maybe some of you know. And car racing, all of you that are involved in it, is a death-defying adventure. And I said, Booker, you know one thing? God has left you here this long, 73 years, for a purpose. He let you race and you did what you wanted to do. You worked on cars, you did what you wanted. There's very few people in this world do what they want to do. They have to work a 9-to-5 job. And they said, but you had people to support you. You had a wife for almost 30 years. And he looked at me and says, yes. And God, I said, you know one thing, you got to accept God in your life and say, because all he wants you to do is say, I'm a sinner, and forgive you for your sins. And it started a gradual process, and finally he did. And when he did that, he was able to give up the cigarettes and the alcohol. Because, you know one thing, but you see, the damage already been done with the cigarettes. But see, he was healed when he left here because God had his future in mind. And I want to thank all of you that you had him on your mind too, because I can just see him smiling down here, and his son and his wife. They're all so pleased. All of us, my brothers and all of us and the whole family. We want to thank you for thinking, because I got some stories to tell too, but I'm not. Oh, some stories of people been calling me up, telling me how he rode in the car. But I'll tell you one, he put me in the car. He said, sis, get in this car, the race car. I said, you crazy? I'm not getting in that car. He says, get in the car. He says, it's not going to hurt you, just get in there. So I got in the race car. It was in the garage. And he said, put the helmet on, put whatever else he put on me. And he reached in and started the motor up. Oh, my Lord. I said, this is it. I'm gone now. Because the car was standing still, but honest, it felt like I was already riding on a racetrack. I didn't know that. I said, well, how do you guys ever, if the car is standing still doing this to me, what in the world when you get on that track is it doing? So if anybody haven't had to experience, except you young men out there that are race car drivers and work around the cars, some of you ladies better get inside a car while it's running still. So anyway, this is, I don't want to be long-winded because we got some more young people back here that want to say a few words. I want to thank everybody. You don't know how appreciative we all are, because I know he's looking down from heaven and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you.
My name is Nat Jones. I'm Booker's brother, and my field is music. So as a very young man, I sort of got out of touch with Booker. But I think I have something to share with you about Booker. My mom decided when we were very young that both of us would become musicians. And Booker also took lessons, and I took lessons. And after the first year, the music teacher decided that Booker definitely was the one that was going to be a great musician. He wasn't sure about me because it was taking a little longer for me to get interested in it. But I was 12, Booker was 15. He did very well for 1 year, then he got his driver's license. And to make a long story short, when he got his driver's license, he became my greatest mentor. He would bring me all over the place, even before I was ready, and have me play for his friends. But when I hear you talk about his spirit, it just does me so much good because I know that spirit as a brother and as a musician, and I know how important he was to my start and how encouraging he was. So you all know that, you know him as a car racer, but I know that that was his personality. No matter what he did, he would have been Booker Jones. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Benjamin Jones. I'm the youngest brother of the four of us. We have 4 brothers and 3 sisters. The one thing that I can remember is, as a kid, he used to always take me over to Riverside Park, and I was very privileged to meet such race drivers as Giacomo, Rini Charlin, the Cigar Man, Muddy Bags Mo Guernsey, Gene Bergen, Eddie Flemke, Dick Dixon. These are some of the drivers that I came up with because I started going to the races in the 60s. But you always knew where Booker was going to be on the weekends. Friday it was Stafford, Saturday was Riverside, and Sunday was Thompson. And the one thing I can remember as if it was yesterday at Riverside is the announcer saying, and here comes Booker T. Washington Jones Jr. around the 3rd turn. And it was just like it was yesterday, even though his middle name is just Booker T. The announcer put some emphasis into it. Booker T. Washington Jones Jr. And that really stuck with me. And the other thing I'd like to say is like I say, my brothers and sisters said earlier, we're really touched and honored to receive this plaque for Booker Jones. And unfortunately, he's not here to accept it himself. But I know he's saying, why are you making such a big fuss over me? Thank you.
It's hard for me to figure out why it took until this year to put Booker in the Hall of Fame. We all know him as a great friend and appreciate what he was able to accomplish on the racetrack and at the racetrack. And it finally came to me that we never voted him in because we thought he'd always be around. And we couldn't bear the thought of dealing with losing such a great friend. And it's still hard. I'm very glad he's here. Our next presenter first gained his love of auto racing when he saw the midgets at Seacon in the mid-40s. And he joined the sport as an official with USAC in 1961. He's officiated at 42 Indianapolis 500s and worked as a race steward for the Indy Racing League and also with NASCAR and IROC. He was just named the recipient of the D. Anthony Venditti Memorial Award for Achievement for the Betterment of Stock Car Racing. Would you please welcome John Noddy.
Our next inductee, Rosie Jo Sestilio, is a person who could be inducted into this Hall of Fame twice, based on two outstanding careers in both midgets and sprints. Some of his achievements are mentioned in the program, and he's one of just a handful of drivers who was a champion on both ends of World War II. In the mid-30s, he was a terror in New England, and he managed to do this while also running a midget from Florida to the fabled mecca of midget racing, Gilmore Stadium in Los Angeles, California. The AAA in 1941 considered him as a franchised driver. This was unheard of at the time. They marketed him. When it was known that he would be appearing, he drew the crowds. There were names like Holland, Wallard, Chitwood, and Bettenhausen, and Sestilio was one of them. Picking it up again after World War II in 1946, first in the maroon and white number 17 Koopman Offie, and then in his own white, very nice looking number 54 leader card Offie, he quickly showed he hadn't lost his touch. We've heard a president's name mentioned earlier today, Theodore Roosevelt. Well, in 1947, the Boston Globe ran a story about Joe Sestilio and let everyone in on a secret. Running a midget that year, he made more money than the President of the United States, Harry Truman. A bit of inside information about Joe. The name Rosie could have been his disposition, possibly could have been his complexion, but it's deeper than that. As a kid, his favorite show featured an actor by the name of Rosebud. And Joe would lie on the floor, listen to the radio, and listen to this show. Somebody at the shop, his father's shop, nicknamed him Rosebud. This was later shortened to Rosie, and that's the only secret about the name. That's how he picked it up. Out in the Midwest, he was known as Joltin' Joe Sestilio, which came as a surprise to me. But all I can figure is at the same time, there was a great Yankee ball player, Joe DiMaggio, who they referred to as Joltin' Joe. Those Hoosiers probably said, well, first name is Joe on both of them. Last name ends in a vowel. Let's call him Joltin' Joe Sestilio. While running his midgets in New England, he dragged them into the cellar during the winter to work on them. He was assisted by his very young daughter, who was known to test the durability of his Offie motors by pounding on them with a very large hammer. In the spring, Joe would drag the midget out of the cellar. His wife Alice would push him with the truck or with a car, and Joe would go around the streets of Natick checking out the motor. He helped very many young people along the way. He took in a very young man, Jimmy Bryan, who showed up at his door with a t-shirt, a pair of jeans, cowboy boots, and very little money. Joe helped to get him started, and in 1958, Jimmy Bryan went on to win the Indianapolis 500 with Joe Sestilio handling the right front tire changes. The right front man is always the most important man on the team. When the Indy Racing League ran at New Hampshire International in 1996, Joe flew up from Florida and with his good friend Tommy Caruso walked the pits. Who spotted Joe and hadn't seen him in over 40 years, but A.J. Foyt. Foyt ran up to him, threw a bear hug around him. Both of them were kind of misty-eyed, and Foyt said to him, "When I left Texas to run the sprints in the Midwest, I was told one person I should watch for was Joe Sicilio." Well, apparently A.J. watched him very well because A.J. went on to win the Indy 500 4 times. Joe's patented trademark. When he'd get pushed off in a midget, he'd have a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, his goggles down around his neck. He'd take a couple of slow laps, reach down with his hand, feel if the oil was warm. When the oil was warm, flip the cigarette, goggles up, and he was on it. You could tell Joe Sicilio, no matter if he was running a car with no number on it. That was his patented way of doing things. Sadly, Joe Sicilio passed away in 2000 at the age of 85. In 1993, some of us saw him last drive a midget at Seacon Speedway when he was honored by the Vendetti family. He was 79 years old at that time, and he still had it. His career spanned 4 decades. He won over 300 midget and sprint car features, and in the halcyon days of midget racing, he ran them 7 nights a week, and then would jump into a sprint car for a Sunday show. He did it all. It is my distinct pleasure to present the name of a great champion, Joe Sicilio, for induction into the Near Hall of Fame. Please welcome Joe Sicilio's daughter, Helen Dolan, who has come up from Florida with her husband, Richard, but without the hammer, to accept this very deserved induction of her dad. Joining Helen and Richard are Joe's niece, Claudette Caruso, her husband, Roger, and their son, Roger P. Would you come up, please?
Mr. Marty, the members of my family would like to thank you for inviting us here to this wonderful honor that you have bestowed upon my father, Joe. He was certainly a professional, not only in his racing career, but as a father and as a wonderful husband to my mother, Alice. I shall tell him about this occasion upon my visit to his final resting place in Newton, Massachusetts. Next I visit him. And to Mrs. Vendetti, thank you so much for always being there for my father. It's wonderful to see you today. Thank you all again so very much on behalf of all my family.
For himself as a public address announcer and now the host of his own weekly radio program, which once each month deals with racing nostalgia and is really a lot of fun to listen to for those of us old enough to remember, and I'm sure for those who are a bit too young. Gary Danko will make our next presentation.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Al Feeney. I'll tell you, Al and your whole staff, you do an incredible job, and you need a round of applause as well, along with your staff. It's a privilege to be here today to talk about a gentleman, and I do mean a gentleman that had a lot of success in his auto racing career. I'm referring to Dick Watson. His first win would come at Plainville Stadium, and we all remember Plainville Stadium, of course the owner, Joe Tinty, and so many talented drivers have come out of Plainville Stadium. He drove for a lot of great car owners in his career, and there's quite a few of them. And I also like to mention, he drove for 8 different car owners, and he won with 8 different car owners as well. Some of those owners, Norm Keyes, Bill Congdon, Fred Doolittle, Bob Garbarino, who is still successful today on the NASCAR Fellow Modified Series as a car owner. He also drove for John Burnett, E.J. Trevette as well. And no matter where Dick Watson would go in his racing career, he was successful. He ran the tracks, as I mentioned, Plainville Stadium. He also ran at the tracks of like Thompson Speedway, Stafford Speedway, Trenton, Longhorn, Martinsville, Lonsdale, Norwood Arena, and Seekonk. He would have success there. He also drove for a gentleman by the name of Butch Frizzetti. He would have success with him as well. But if you talk to Dick Watson, he had success with owner Bob Garbarino. From that, he would go on, as I mentioned, to drive for several other people. But most of what he remembers the most in his racing career, and there's a lot, we'd be here all day talking about Dick Watson in his career. He got a special trophy in the mid-60s. It was a Special Achievement Award from NASCAR. Another big achievement award for Dick Watson, he was the Connecticut State Modified Champion. That is equal today as what we know as the Regional Championship. He also won the World Series at Thompson Speedway in 1966. And what was real memorable about that, Dick Watson won the modified portion of that event. Do you remember who won the sportsman event? It was Ed Flemke Sr. That sticks out in Dick Watson's mind. Some of the people that Dick Watson really looked up to in his auto racing career, and there were many, Dick Biergard, Don Collins, and Eddie Flemke Sr. As we told you about some of the other car owners, Fred Bieber was also an owner that Dick Watson drove for. Dick Watson also drove in the Grand National Division, what we know now as Winston Cup. He ran in 1967 at the Thompson Speedway, or correction, 1969, I'm sorry, and he would finish 13th in that Grand National event. He had so many other achievements in his career. As we told you, his most successful in his racing career was at the Waterford Speed Bowl. Many wins there. Dick Watson still returns to Waterford Speed Bowl to drive in a race car. That's right, every year at the Waterford Speed Bowl, they have what we know as Heroes or a Legends event, and he gets in the sportsman car, and guess what? He did what he did best. That was win. Also, I know when Dick Watson gets up here, there's so many people that he would like to thank in his auto racing career. He also ran at the Dover Speedway in a Grand National car as well. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you a gentleman who had success everywhere that he ran. Would you please welcome Mr. Dick Watson.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, fellow competitors, and race fans. Thank you, Gary, for the introduction. I would also like to thank the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame and the president of New England Antique Racers, Al Feeney, for a job well done. Thank you very much. My induction into the Near Hall of Fame represents not only my accomplishments, but each and every one of yours as well. I could not have had my racing career without you. As we all know, the sport depended on having car owners who believed in us and were willing to take a chance with us. For that opportunity, I would like to thank a few who have played an important role in my racing career. I started racing in 1953 at the New London Waterford Speed Bowl, driving in a non-Ford division in a cut-down coupe with some success. The following year, 1954, the Speed Bowl returned to the full-bodied coupes. I competed in that division at Plainville and West Haven as well. In fact, that year brought me my very first feature win. The following year, I returned to Plainville Stadium and Waterford Speed Bowl, driving a flathead Ford Sportsman for John Lazier out of Middlefield, Connecticut. We also raced with flathead Fords at the Lonsdale Speedway in one of their 200-lap events. With teammate Joe McNulty, we each drove 100 laps to complete the 200 and finish a respectable 5th place. Some of the other race cars that I had the pleasure of driving on the speedways of the Northeast were the number 711 Gold Scorpion. That was owned by John and Joanne Barnett. The number 305, owned by Paul Sikorsky. The number 75 and 76 with Bill Congdon. The V4
and the V41, owned by the Garbarino brothers, Bob and Skip. The number 21, Red Ram, with Norm Kives. E.J. Trevets, 09 Grand National. Fred Bieber, with a checkerboard number 716. There were other race car owners that were giants in the sport that made me proud to have driven for them on a race-to-race basis. And those such names, Barney Tizzy, Butch Ferret, whom I drove for in Norwood Arena, Freddie Doolittle of the famed Freddie's TV, number 23, Billy Simons, number 9, Sharky Gaddiosi in his number 4 car, Al and Peg Gadrew in that number 3 car, Bob Viteri and Vic Bombassi in their later years, John and Sonny Cazella at Thompson in the Woodchopper Special. In the early years of stock car racing, there weren't too many publications available, nor was there a racing media such as we have today. But there are some names that I'd like to mention that played an important part of promoting us as drivers to the public. Tiny Small with a New London Day. Ed Doherty with the Rhode Island newspapers. Gene Ruppel, Speedway Scene. B. Smith, Dave Shippey and John Brower, Dick Bergerman, Bruce Cohen, Lou Boyd, Owen Gousier, Phil Smith, Championship Trail, Don and Kathy Cody, who wrote the Near publications, Pete Vanderveer, Dave Dykes, Gary Danko with his radio talk show, Tom Ormsby of VintageModified.com. All of the aforementioned car owners and media have played an important part of me standing here this afternoon accepting my induction into the Near Hall of Fame. I must also thank all my friends for being here to share this special afternoon with me. What would racing be without race fans? A couple of years ago, an old friend and acquaintance, Pete Zanardi, wrote a driver profile on me in the May 2000 issue of Trackside magazine. The title of the article was In the Land of the Giants. After reading the story, I really never understood what the meaning or significance of that title was. I now fully understand it. And yes, Pete, I am truly in the land of the giants. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is a champion of the NASCAR Modified Tour, and he is forever the track record holder of Riverside Park Speedway for winning percentage in one season and modified victories in one season with 12. A man who graduated from the ranks of the figure eights to the national stage, Jerry Markey.
I would like to thank New England Antique Racers for the excellent job they have done preserving our racing heritage. When Dan Pardee first called me to be the presenter for Bob Judkins, I thought to myself, what an honor. That was before I found out I had to give a speech. I heard that Bob took 5 years to build his first race car. I didn't know why, but I do know that history repeats itself. When I drove for him, he was building another new car. It took 2 or 3 years before he got that one on the racetrack too. I did find out why, the reason to my why is when I got in that car, it was a Cadillac of race cars. It had the latest and greatest of everything. Not store-bought stuff, but parts that were all made by him or by his crew. He was very meticulous on building his race cars. Jerry Wheeler drove the first Bob Judkins creation at Plainville Stadium, along with Tony Mordino, Billy Harmon, Eddie Flemke. Eddie Flemke was one that got Bob to paint the 2X on his race car. As part of the bandit crowd that ran up and down the whole East Coast from Maine to Florida. Mario Fats Caruso, Randy Charland. Speaking of Randy Charland, he approached me before we got going here today, and he had said that if you want to tow your car up to Fonda, he'd be willing to win the race for you, not a problem. He said that you did that a few times. Gene Burgeon, Kenny Shoemaker. Maynard Ferret, Reggie Ruggiero, Brett Bodine, Ron Bouchard were just some of the drivers lucky enough to sit behind the wheel of the 2X. With Ron, he captured 22 and then 26 wins in 2 seasons. Quite an accomplishment. During this time, he put forth the Pinto Revolution in 1971. NASCAR didn't like it too much. They didn't want to have change in their coupe days. Jack Arute was a key figure to getting Bob's Pinto approved. Gene Burgeon was the first driver to drive the Pinto for Bob. Bob would continue to excel in his field even in the 80s and 90s, building his own cars and motors in an era when everybody was buying all their components for racing. What can I say about a man that I thought I knew but didn't really know? A businessman, a car builder, motor builder, family man with 7 kids, grandkids, a lovely wife, and she called me to tell me I had to put that in because she's my cousin. No wonder it took him so long to build his race cars with everything else going on. To me, he's the Clark Kent of auto racing, the mild-mannered car owner and the supercar builder. Not only did he have the best cars on the racetrack, but he did it with the smallest budget I've ever seen. He always goes to swap meets and finds that all-important part or parts to build his cars. He always called it his gold. I remember times at Riverside, he and the crew, Dan Seher, would go through the piles of tires at the tire truck to find some tires so that we could race the following week. It is an honor to be among the elite group of drivers that Bob has had. A couple of years ago, Bob moved to Florida. He called me and said he found another Jerry Marquis to drive his race car for him. It gave me a proud feeling inside to know that he wanted someone like myself to drive his race car for him again. That was one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. To this day, he continues to win races and championships in Florida. It is an honor, and I am proud to induct Bob Judkins into the Near Hall of Fame.
Well, I don't have too much to say. Jerry said it all for me. I have to thank the Near voters that got me here. I didn't think I'd ever be here, but I'm here. Except for Bones, I'm going to pay him off. The guys that helped me, I have to thank them a lot. Like Chuck Grimes, Steve Polak, Dave Adams, Bill Foley, Danny Sear. All those guys helped me. Art Weiss too. I spent a lot of hours painting on my cars and trucks. And as far as drivers goes, I had all the best, I think. I had Flinty. I had Gary, of course, Fast Crusoe, Dave Crusoe, Jim Herderies, Brett Bodine, Randy Charland. I had them all. There's a lot more, but they were all good. They're the ones that put me here, believe me. Without them, I wouldn't be here. And I have to thank some of my sponsors, but I didn't have too many. I have to thank my son-in-law, F.J. Humany, he helped me. Smoker Racing Fuel helped me. Kendall Oil helped me a little bit. And Bill's Bean Shocks helped me. I have to thank them too. Every little bit helps in this game. Then one of all, I have to thank the guy that brought my pencil here. I thank him for bringing it here. And I have to thank Jack O'Rourke especially. He went really out of his way to get that thing into NASCAR so I could race it. He did a lot of strings he pulled. And then I have this lastly, thanks to my family, all my kids. A lot of times I wasn't there when I should have been there.
We love you, Dad.
But they stepped behind me. And my wife too. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Our final inductee has been a friend of mine for nearly 30 years, and I was honored when he called and asked me to give his induction speech. And as you know, from the last 5 years, I'm a little uncomfortable when I'm talking about my heroes and my friends, but I'll get through this. We celebrate a man who is in his 7th decade of driving race cars. Okay, 1948, that was a soapbox derby car. But it was a race car when Bob Bulberry took the downhill at age 12. In high school, spent a lot of afternoons at Booker Jones Auto Repair Shop, tearing things apart, putting it back together, and he built himself a hobby stock car and raced during high school, and then embarked on one of his many and now celebrated retirements. I've been asked many times today if this would be a roast, and haven't we already had 4 or 5 of those? One for each retirement, so this will not be a roast today. Bob learned his trade in high school. Folks who've seen him at work say he's faster with a hammer than most nail guns. But he quickly realized that he would not go far working for other people. Went to friends, acquaintances, anyone he could find, and borrowed enough money to buy a piece of land and build an apartment complex in West Springfield. And thus was born the Bulberry ethic: work hard, play hard. Boy, can this guy play. He gets more out of 24 hours than anybody I have ever seen. And perhaps that's why he is still competitive on the modified tour today at the age of 66. He won his first of 38 modified features at his home track, Riverside Park Speedway, in 1971. And that same year, in his number 711 coupe, won the Riverside 500 team race with Bob Kalsher. He'd go on to win that race again 3 more times, twice with Ron Wyckoff, who was seated here until moments ago. Here's Ronnie walking back in as his teammate. And once with Jerry Cook. The record shows that Bob drove 487 of the 500 laps, and yet the payoff sheet shows that Jerry took his full half of the payoff. Now that's not so funny. It wasn't funny to Bob at the time, but it illustrates his work ethic and his integrity, because that was the deal. They would split the purse, no matter what happened. And he held to that agreement. Bob joined the Pinto Revolution in the early 1970s with a blue Vega, and then one winter night, amongst a group of friends and his volunteer crew led by Barry Cannell and his dad, 4 volunteers, a design was sketched out on a body in the corner of the garage that became the white Vega with the blue stripe, and Riverside's now famed Chevy Under Glass is the car that became. And with it, they won the 75 Riverside Championship. They won the championship again in 1976, winning half of the 16-point races and scoring in 16 starts, 14 top 3 finishes. Bulberry came back in 77 to successfully defend his title and win his 3rd straight championship. Stafford Motor Speedway beckoned when they moved to Friday nights. What was the best way to get fans to a track that had previously run Saturdays? Get them from all the other Saturday night tracks. So we targeted drivers from Waterford, from Westboro, from Plainville, and we targeted Bob Bulberry, who came to run Stafford as a regular, and I think was largely possible for the success of the switch to Friday night, because of the fans who couldn't come on Fridays from long distances used to coming to Stafford. A lot of them were replaced by fans from the tracks that I just mentioned, and especially from Riverside. His biggest win, 1981, the Spring Sizzler at Stafford Motor Speedway. Richie Evans made a gamble on a late tire stop and came charging up through the field. Pulverary beat him off the final corner. They exited the corner side by side, and Bob won by inches in a race that was broadcast nationally by Motor Racing Network. In 1982, he chased the Modified National Championship. He had 2 victories in 67 starts, a raft of top 5 finishes, picked up yet another 4th Riverside Championship in the process, and finished 5th in the national point standings. He investigated Winston Cup racing, continued running at the park through 1990, when, after winning his 5th championship at Riverside, which is the all-time record, he again retired. 1998, Riverside comes up with a race of legends, and the hook is firmly set once again. And Bob comes back to racing full-time and scores 5 more victories over the final 2 years of the park's existence. If there was a cookout, it was because Bob organized it. Even at the final modified race at Martinsville, Virginia, just a couple of months ago, there's a big corn roast and softball game put on by, guess who? If there's a party, Party Central is located right around Pulverary's Hall. In the 1960s, the Springfield newspaper artist Jim Trelease would do cartoons of various sports figures, and the caption of the cartoon would illustrate their accomplishments, and he'd always do 1 or 2 on racing. And I don't know how this floated to the top of the box this week of things, but this is Jim's original artwork from 1969 that I'll present to Bob along with his plaque, and in pencil on the tissue covering his caricature, it says, "Bob Pulverary, West Springfield, promising rookie." How true that would become. He had a knack, Pete Zanardi called him a giant killer because he won the big ones, the 4 500s, the 5 Riverside titles. He won the last race at Riverside Park under United, under Harvey Tattersall. Came back the next spring, won the very first NASCAR race at Riverside. He won the pole for the last modified tour race at Riverside and nearly won that. As we all know, when they rang down the curtain at Riverside Park for the final time, who was standing in victory lane? Bob Pulverary yet again, for the last of 38 victories there. Today we had to change the rules for Stub Fadden and for Bob, because the only way we're going to get him in this Hall of Fame was, instead of saying he had to be retired for 5 years, we said, well, or 65 or over. So Stub is the first active driver in the Hall of Fame. Bob is the first active driver in a major touring series to be inducted, and he is also the first driver to hold a top division current track record. He is the outright modified track record holder at the Thompson Speedway. He was named one of Stafford Speedway's top 50 drivers of all time, and was named one of the top 50 athletes of the century of Western Massachusetts. He comes into the Hall on the first year of his eligibility, to the surprise of no one. Bob Pulverary, would you come up, please?
It's such an honor to be inducted today. When Al Feeney came in the middle of winter and told me I'd be an inductee, I was going to be inducted this year. At first I wasn't sure how to take it, but it means an awful lot to me. I know we put a lot of effort into it, but more than anything, when I go into this Hall of Fame, I want my crew to know that they're all part of it, and my family, because they were a big incentive on getting me, keeping me going for all these years. They work so hard, the crew doesn't get paid, and they just put so much effort into this. It means so much to me, and I want them to know that they're in there as much as I am. The memories I've got in the past are probably more important than anything I've accomplished, or wins, or accomplishments, or car of the year, or this or that. The memories from meeting all these drivers. I've always gotten along with most of the drivers, the crew members, the owners, the media people, and the promoters, and more than anything, I've always been very close to all my fans. When Al Feeney had me get a couple pictures to put in the plaque, I started going through my album. My son had put them together about 10 years ago. I had never had any albums. They were just in boxes, and he put a bunch of albums together. And I started going through them, probably not the first time, but the second time, and going through them, for every picture of a race car you'd see, there'd probably be 5 or 6 fan letters, notes, birthday cards, and so on. And I mean, I always realized they meant so much to me, but if you look at my albums, you'll realize that the fans are the biggest part of my race, and maybe they're a big part why I'm still in it, because we can't ever go to a race without the fans coming down and talking to us, and it means an awful lot to me. Back in, when I was younger, like Mike was saying, I got involved in the soapbox derby with my dad. We built the soapbox derby, and I used to go to Century Stadium. I remember like it happened yesterday, getting the autograph from Bill Schindler. And I don't know if that's what got me going into the racing, but it meant an awful lot to me. And at that time, we made many trips up to Springfield Airport, and they had the GB plane. It had a 7-Eleven and dice on it, and I just carried that number through with me on my first race car, which was in '54. I built one in '53. I built it with out my grandmother's yard. I was kind of young at the time, and I welded it with coat hangers and oxygen acetylene, and we went to push it a couple months later someplace, and every bar fell off it. So my dad made me scrap that one. I got a 38 for it, and that's the one we started running. But before the 50s, 48, 49, 50, I used to go over and, like Mike was saying, I helped Booker an awful lot, and I just had I think that's what probably helped get me going, between Booker and, if anybody remembers Bob and Ed Lappy, we used to cut fenders off for them and stuff like that and do whatever we could. They meant a lot to me, and got me into the sport, I think, at least got me interested in it. Back in the 50s, we used to run some demo derbies. Randy Charland, Gene Bergen, Eddie Flunky, Booker. We'd all get in there. They'd give us $25 a night to run a demo derby. And as you crash, and somebody would crash out or something like that, they jump in your car, and by the end of the night, no safety belts or anything, by the end of the night, you'd have 8, 10 guys in the car and be banging everybody around. But back then, it was a lot of fun. I'm not saying it's not fun today, because I love all the drivers. I enjoy them all. We have a great time. But back then, it was definitely different, and it was more casual. And we just had a great time, and hopefully it can keep up for a few more years. When I got one of my first cars, well, when I came back, I guess one of the times, 69 or 70, I put a guy out the first, second night I was driving that car, and accidentally put him in a wall, and I was coming off the track, and coming off the pit gate, and one of his crew, he had warned me the night before, or the week before, because I had put him on that night too, but I just couldn't drive that. But anyways, one of his crew came in my car and dove in, tried to pull me out and give me a couple shots, and all of a sudden he got ripped out of it and got cold cocked, dropped him on the floor, and it was one of my crew chief today. He's been with me for many years, Gary McNavich. Everybody knows Gary. But anyways, Gary came over to me that night, and it's the first time I had never met him before. I didn't know him, and he came over to me and he says, as long as you're around, buddy, he says, I'm going to be your friend, and nobody's going to ever hit you again. So, of course, you don't come with me every day. Another time, just to move along, in the early 70s, we had won the 571, but we were struggling in 72, and one guy kept coming around the garage probably every week. He'd mosey around the garage, look around, and tell us how we just didn't know how to make a car go fast enough, this and that. And kind of cocky, but after a while I had to take him up on it. I said, well, why don't you try it? So Barry Gunnell, who now is the winningest crew chief on the tour, came in, became my crew chief, and things started happening. We started winning races, and it was a joy to have him. It's a joy to still have him as a friend, and not only a friend, but he's been around the garage. We've been struggling last year a little bit. We got a whole new crew, so we're trying to get this thing going for this year, and he gives us assistance as we need it and suggestions, and he's been great. he's been a great lifetime friend. His dad was real close to my dad. They had worked together back in General Bacon Company back in the 40s and 30s. Then in '73, Mike might have had it just a little bit off, but I remember Mike used to come in the garage quite often, and we were going to try and get a new color together. Barry had decided, he says, how much longer are you going to change cars every year? You change, one year it's maroon, the next year it's yellow, next year it's blue, and then one year we put fuzz on the roof, we electrified it and sprayed this fuzz, and it became velvet kind of like that. And so we decided, let's get one color. So we were trying to decide the color. Mike Joy came in the garage a few days later with a model of a car. We still have it. It's a little model. He painted it pearl white and with the blue bag on the roof and the Chevy emblem on the roof, the blue interior and the blue outside. And really, that's where the color came from. Mike was the innovator of that, and we've kind of stayed with it. We always had the pearl white on there, and we're back to it again now. And it's just, I guess it's 7-Eleven, you know. Another guy I drove for the Zarnicki's in 1978. I thought I was taking the year off, but I ended up driving for them, and they had the 20 car, which Bobby Stefanik did so well in for so many years. And a couple of their sons there used to hang around the garage all the time. They were 5 or 6 years old, and took the oil can and squirted all their brakes one night. We got out there and wiped the car out, and that was Ricky's Zarnicki's now my car owner. So Ricky's back in the game again, but at that time he was just going around trying to help us. And his brother Joey is my spotter. Like I say, we've got a new crew from last year. We've got the same crew we had last year, but this year we'll get it going a little better. I'd like to finish this off finally thanking all my friends, my golf buddies that came down tonight to see us, and especially my fans, my crew. I've got just about all my crew here, and a lot of the old crew, which it means a lot to me to have them here. Billy Pelly, who I was with in the 90s. Tommy Savisa, who's now my crew chief and was my crew chief on our last championship in 1990. It means an awful lot to me, and like all these guys are saying, you need all the people together, or you can't make it work. And especially my wife, my son Rod, my daughter Liz, my grandkids. Our family sacrificed an awful lot in the past for my racing. Weddings we couldn't go to, and wakes and funerals and so forth. And it really great. My wife and I have been married 44 years. I love her. And I want to thank my whole family, my crew, and everybody. Thank you very much, and especially being elected in the Hall of Fame.
Bob O'Rourke becomes the 57th member of the Near Hall of Fame. Thanks to all of you for your continued support of NEAR and for being with us today. Best wishes for a happy and a very safe 2003 season. Thank you.